My name's Jack Pearpoint. Welcome to Voices Seldom Heard. This is the first in a series of programs which will give an opportunity to people who we don't normally hear from about issues that they feel are relevant. Today's program is on access to adult education. Many educational institutions in the last few years have learned to respond to demands. This film raises the issue of how do we respond to needs. And in order to do that, we have brought together a number of people who represent different categories of needs that we are not normally used to thinking about. Today we have two guests to begin the program, Marilyn Collins and Sue Adele. Marilyn is a person who has already managed to do very well in the education system, but in that process has had a number of difficulties and is aware of many people who certainly haven't had the success that she has. So we'd like to talk to Marilyn about what have been problems in your perspective in access to adult education.
Well, Jack, I don't write at all. I type very slowly. It takes me about 3/4 of an hour to type one page. So when I went through school in the junior grades, they kept me back for 2 years in each grade in order to give me the time to put things down on paper. Then I went to a girls' school, and rather than ask for extra time, I went through a nightmare, I call it, to keep up. I was constantly under tension, under pressure, for fear I would not make the deadlines that are instigated through a regular classroom situation. In university, it was the same thing. I got my education simply because I was willing to be unhappy most of the time throughout most of the process. I wouldn't expect anyone else to go through that. It would be too difficult to experience. Fortunately, I don't have trouble thinking. I don't have trouble getting my thoughts together. I can sit through a lecture and recall it from memory. I don't have to take notes like the way a majority of students, non-handicapped and handicapped, do. But as a result, I had to spend more time reading, more time thinking, because I didn't have it down in front of me.
What kind of things could have been done, Marilyn, to make it easier for you rather than the painful process that you went through?
Well, our school system puts emphasis on having pieces of paper. Even our work environment puts emphasis on having things down on black and white. There was some experimentation with me in grade 9 about using a tape recorder for education. I found that psychologically difficult in terms of accepting my own voice on tape recorder. But had I worked through that, school would have been a lot easier. Another thing was more emphasis on oral work in the classroom. Maybe I wouldn't have an essay done on time, but if I had an oral exam or oral essays in university, they did allow me to have an oral exam, and I found that it was, I never experienced anything so easy in all my life, because it was just, I just had to speak. I didn't have to go through the tension of mentally going over and over the answer till
So
I
in many
got
ways,
down.
if people asked you how they could help, just a simple question of asking, that would you would have a lot of the solutions, and that's perhaps a first lesson. The second person, we're aware that we're moving very quickly, but there are a wide range of people who we don't hear from. And the second person today is Sue Adele. And Sue will be using bliss symbols, but because bliss symbols are very slow, she has prepared the following message, which I'll read from Susan. My name is Susan Adele, and I am a symbol user. 10 years ago, I wondered why I needed school. I thought I needed a hospital setting all of the time, but I have now changed my ideas. Cerebral palsy, non-speaking people don't need hospital because we are not sick. I feel we need much more understanding from other people. Now I have symbols. I wish I could go to school again because other people now can see that I am able to learn. I want to learn to read much more than I can at present. I know that out in the big world people need to learn about symbol users, that their needs to learn are not different from other people. It just takes more time and hard work to do it. Susan, what about the whole issue of communication? I speak up, Marilyn.
Feel we have different. I feel we have pencil, and pointing down here, up here. Q. 1. I feel we have 1.
Got it.
Difficult. With non-speaking persons. They are smart. They necessary. No, they necessarily no need. School. Because I am smart. I can learn. Quick. But I have difficulty speaking. disabled users need to have the opportunity to go to school. Now, they can learn. The difficulty is that they have difficulty speaking and therefore need more time. That correct, Sue?
Our third guest this afternoon is Judy Snow, a lecturer at York University. Judy, you have a lot of opinions about access to adult education.
Well, I'm going to start off assuming that other people on this tape will talk about how handicapped people should have access to the adult education system, and I'm going to turn it around for a minute, as is my wont. You probably don't realize, but handicapped people get put into a system which is entirely closed, even when they stay with their families and when services are offered to them. The system is closed in the sense that a child and later on an adult will go from his or her home to a segregated classroom where he or she only meets other handicapped people and people who serve that person, and then comes back to the home, and in a very real sense they never touch the real world. And it's fairly obvious to see that that's detrimental to the handicapped person themselves. But people don't often realize that it's very detrimental to the society at large, that there are hundreds of thousands of people out there who've never actually met a person like myself. And when they finally do, by accident, run across a person such as myself, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to talk to me. They don't know how to deal with my physical needs. They don't realize that I don't have very many needs that are extraordinary to a human being, and that really I would much rather just meet them on a person-to-person level and not as some strange being meeting a human being, right? The reason they feel that way is they haven't had contact with people like me. So when I think of access, I think how much chance does the average person in the real world get to meet someone like me? And since they've grown up in this world and they're now adults and they haven't had that chance, what can we do now to educate them as adults into what my world is like, and ultimately to join our two worlds so that they're really the same world? The educational system obviously can do a lot by making it possible for people who have physical and mental handicaps to actually participate in the regular school program. They bring people together, and that's very important. But beyond that, I think that especially during this year and perhaps in the next few years, handicapped people themselves have something of a responsibility to speak out about what their life is like. And this tape is an example of that. To tell people that what our real needs are and what they are not, and to begin to bridge those barriers. What do you think?
Well, one of the things you said earlier, Judy, before this taping, was that there's an expert around on any disability. When you're around, you are an expert on your handicap.
That's right.
And one of the things that bothers us all is, we all get terribly traumatized about how do we deal with a person in a chair or whatever it is, because we're inexperienced. And I think your comment was, there I am, ask.
Ask me, yeah.
And
I'm the person who knows.
And I think that's a big part of the answer that we've got to do this year and in the next few years, is simply ask.
Yeah, I think that's really the thing. People don't realize that I know exactly what's going on for me, and that I can say, and that's true of everybody. I think that's true. You can tell me more about what you need than anybody else. I can tell you more about what I need.
Our next guest is Diane Plassey Gutierrez, who's a rehabilitation counselor at the Canadian Hearing Society. We had hoped that while Diane was part of this taping that we would be able to provide simultaneous translation for the whole tape, but due to technical difficulties we were unable to proceed with that. However, our interpreter for Diane is Leslie Corrodi. Diane, we'd like to talk to you about your experience in continuing education, both as a professional and as a person, and some of the difficulties you've had.
I've
had my problems. It is called accessibility, really. I could go into a school and say, I want to learn Spanish so I can talk with my in-laws, but I can't take it because they require tapes and headphones. There will be 30 in the class. I would have to understand the teacher talking, the students speaking back, all in Spanish, and without opening my book. I tried that once, and I had to drop out of the class. It was too frustrating. My husband, at the same time, tried to take an electrical course in high school at night. He had to drop out. Also, the teacher said that there would be a lot of writing material. It didn't turn out to be true. It was all lectures. There was no interpreter to be found. He did not get his promotion, and he didn't learn electronics the way he had hoped to.
I understand that from your experience in the United States, there are many different programs there, and many of the regulations and constraints have already been removed.
Yes. In Washington, D.C., they had all deaf continuing education classes. Some of them had teachers who were also deaf. They were very good teachers because of the common language. Some of the teachers were tradespeople who taught their own trades. We had teletype repair that enabled us to set on our own telephone system because we had the technical knowledge.
What about the issue of interpretation? That seems to be a fairly basic one.
If you can find an interpreter with skill enough in signs, who's flexible enough to meet the language level for that deaf person, and who knows the material that has been talked about, then you will have a perfect interpreter. There will be no problems. But we don't have that many interpreters to begin with, not alone the variety.
Our next guest is Lee Tarshish. Lee is an employee of the Ministry of Community and Social Services and has a variety of opinions and experiences with our adult education system. Lee.
Well, to begin with, I strongly feel that physically handicapped people should be educated because they're as good as anybody else. They're willing to learn, and from my point of view, I've gone through the education thing right from public school, and I'll tell you something. To be honest with you, if it weren't for the people that have taken me under their arm to teach me, I would not have been able to learn anything. And then, I might as well start with my public school. My public school, I had a very special teacher who sort of gave me special tutoring and all this. And then in junior high, since I was different from anybody else in the school, they used to ridicule me like you wouldn't believe. I was called all kinds of nasty names, and then in junior high it was the same thing. And then in the school, and then in the high school I was in, I got treated so bad that there were days I used to come home literally so upset and literally crying, and And I went to the teachers a couple of times to tell him what was wrong, and he never, and only certain teachers took my side. But no, I think that physically handicapped people are as good as anybody else. And then from there, I went into the world of work, and I got treated the same thing. But every employer I've come in contact with says I was one of the best workers they ever had. But
so if you get a chance, you're okay.
I get a chance, but they won't do it.
Yeah.
They won't do it, and they think that they're lousy workers, and that we can't handle our money and we can't live by ourselves. Because I've been living at Runnymede and Bloor, as you well know, for the last 5.5 years, and if I had to do it again and to help people get out on their own, I do it. But no, I don't think the people in the world know enough about the physically handicapped. No wonder they haven't been exposed to them. They don't know what we're like. They think that we're no good for anything and that we can't make a name for ourselves, because that to me is really stupid, and I'm putting a big emphasis on that, because this is true. Anybody that says we aren't is really dumb, and that's what I choose to finish with. They're all stupid and they don't know what they're doing. But for me, to go back to the years I've passed from, I wouldn't do it for anything, because that they have the wrong opinion about people like us or any physically handicapped people. They have the wrong opinion. They think we're not capable of doing anything, and that's it. But I'd like to just finish with this one statement, and this is the end. And I'm not, and I choose to. And if anybody wants to know why I feel like this, I'm just going to say, anybody that thinks that we're not capable is really stupid, and that's what I finish with.
Our next guest is Mike Yale, a new Canadian author, and his dog Mitch. Mike, among other things, is the founder of Boost, and as a result has a great deal of experience with accessibility to education. Mike, could you tell us a bit about Boost and some of the problems you've encountered?
Well, Jack, Boost is a self-help group of blind people that's been involved in legislative lobbying, advocacy work, public and self-education, and employment issues, particularly related to blind, though we're involved with other disabled groups as well. One of our present activities is a speakers bureau that sends blind people to schools, every school from kindergarten on up to university, speaking with classes and even with teachers groups, boards of education and so forth, to just try and sensitize them a bit more to the kinds of issues that are of concern to the blind and handicapped people generally.
One of the issues you mentioned was that the education system in general tries to funnel handicapped people of all kinds into particular areas.
Absolutely. When I was a student in university in the 60s in the States, social welfare became the rage, and blind people for a while were funneled into that department. It seemed like it was the place for them. It was a job they could do. It was a stereotype kind of job. But, and there's nothing wrong with being in that field. This is the problem. There's nothing wrong with being a darkroom technician if you're blind. There's nothing wrong with being a computer programmer, social worker. There's also nothing wrong if you're in a wheelchair being a watch repairer, or if you're deaf to be working in a factory where loud noises won't bother you. All of those stereotypes, there's nothing wrong with them if they're a choice. If you have an opportunity and a choice to pursue the things that you're interested in, and to say, I'm not interested in those stereotype jobs. The problem is that society has come just far enough in its acceptance that they will accept certain jobs, certain fields for each group of handicapped people.
Yeah.
And they expect us to stay there.
One of the other things you were mentioning, Mike, is that the system also determines social and sexual experiences and really denies them to people.
Well, particularly those in institutions, but even those who are reasonably well integrated into a university setting or an educational setting, the problems with socializing, dating, sexual experiences, the whole range of integrative skills that come from relationships with other people, they're largely denied to you, either by the setting itself or by the attitudes of the people that you are attempting to mix with. I think that for an adult, for a handicapped adult, this area is perhaps one of the most severe, because even with skills, even with certain training, to move out into the community, you absolutely have to have the whole range of social skills that most of us are denied from the time we're children.
Our last guest this afternoon is Jane DeBell, who's been involved as a trustee in education in the Ottawa area for the past 10 years. Ottawa is a place where educational institutions have had a long-term commitment to adult education, and I'm wondering how you react to these kinds of issues, Jane.
Well, Jack, I'm both discouraged and encouraged by what I've seen this afternoon. I'm discouraged because I have to recognize the truth of what's been said by your other speakers. We didn't serve these people when they were students in the past as we should have or might have or could have. And I don't think we're serving them now as adults. I don't think we really have the kind of commitment that they're asking for and that you refer to. Adults, as far as the school system are concerned, are a peripheral group. If there's room, if they fit in, if it isn't too much trouble, we might respond to a well-articulated demand. But we haven't in the past gone out and really asked people what their needs, perhaps the groups which were harder to serve. Yeah. And I think that's what we have to do. That's what I hear them saying. Are you committed? If you want a service, you can do so. We know how. Ask us.
Yeah, I think it was fascinating and a very optimistic trend that basically everybody in their own way said, just ask us. And,
that's right.
We have a lot of the answers.
And when I think that, principals of night school are asked to determine what courses to put on in some of the school systems, well, how could they without an advisory group? And if they had an advisory group, then they'd know.
Yeah. No, I think it gives us a tremendous opportunity to create some opportunities for a lot of people who've been left out.
But I think in Ontario, they have to decide at the Ministry of Education what their commitment to adult education is, and what the educational rights of adults. They have to stop dancing around that question, and perhaps this is something that will be determined during this year. You mentioned that there were other groups. This is Voices Seldom Heard, one in a series.
Well, when we began this concept of Voices Seldom Heard, it was one. But as we think about it, the people we've heard today are really the articulate few who've managed to come through the system, and they represent in themselves thousands of other people. But if we think about it even one step further, there are other groups. There are single parents, there are seniors, there are millions of illiterate people, there are Aboriginal Indians. There are a wide range of groups in Canada, in Ontario today, that don't have access. So we plan to have further issues in this series to help us to learn to listen and hopefully to respond. Thank you for listening.